that which is of paramount importance for the children, that which must precede all else, is to teach them the oneness of God and the laws of God. For lacking this, the fear of God cannot be inculcated, and lacking the fear of God, an infinity of odious and abominable actions will spring up, and sentiments will be uttered that transgress all bounds. Parents must exert every effort to rear their offspring to be religious, for should the children not attain this greatest of adornments, they will not obey their parents, which in a certain sense means that they will not obey God. Indeed, such children will show no consideration to anyone and will do exactly as they please. Baha'u'llah. And when the child hath reached the age where he can make distinctions, let him be placed in a Baha'i school, in which at the beginning the holy texts are recited and religious concepts are taught. At this school, the child is to study reading and writing, as well as some fundamentals of the various branches of knowledge, such as can be learned by children. Abdul Baha. So today, we're very happy to have Dr. Teresa Langness join us, and her topic is the Baha'i Faith, a New Vision for Schools. Author and educator Teresa Langness developed the global educational model Full Circle Learning, FCL. She leads the nonprofit organization by the same name, which has trained practitioners in 35 nations over 3 decades. She's written 50 books in multiple genres and has served in professional and volunteer capacities in the fields of education, communications, the environment, human relations, and religion. She became a Baha'i 35 years ago. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Langness.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to be here with you today. And I'm just so touched by the introductory video. It was very heartwarming. And the quote also was a wonderful day to begin, a wonderful way to begin today, because the first thing that I would like to point out is that the parents are the first educators. And by parents, I include all of us in this Zoom room, because the world is a village. We are all the parents, the grandparents, the aunties, the uncles, the sisters, the brothers of all the children. And so they belong to us. The world is their school and we are their teachers. So thank you for pointing out that teaching spirituality, teaching love of God, that rests with those who have the closest relationship to the child before they even attend school. And now we'll move on to the question of, okay, so what happens when we let them go off into the world, into a school? So at some point in their lives, almost all children wonder, why am I in school? What is the point? Why do I need to even go to school? And the way that they respond to this question somewhat depends on the cultural dynamics of education in that region. Some recent studies compared the differences in motivation and actual learning in several parts of the world. The results mirrored distinctions not only in the environmental conditions and the social conditions and the history of learning, but also in the philosophies and the cultural norms. Where nurturing and collaboration and spirituality existed, that affected the student's understanding of their purpose in learning. And in countries where extrinsic rewards and personal needs dominated the value system, those factors influenced learning. But in a region where a student could look around and see the deep needs of society, in other words, in countries where everything was not perfect and going perfectly well, those students in these studies came to see that they were needed. The solutions depended on their actions. And that's when context became an important motivator. These students focused on organizing and applying information according to its relevancy. So what we might infer from this is that basically the significance not only of social factors and geographic culture, but of a transcendent and higher principle is at play here, a culture that addresses the exigencies of the age. When we think about education in this era, how can we resist seeing it as a powerful tool for transforming society wherever we live and whatever we have as our prevailing issue? When we speak of religion in this era, we think in terms of transformation, and we can't think in terms of transformation without thinking of education. And so we align our purpose, our divine purpose, with the revelation of the age. And through religion and education, we achieve transformation. For Baha'u'llah said, is not the goal of every revelation to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind? A transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and its external conditions. How do you influence the inner life and the external conditions? What a powerful thing Baha'u'llah has said to us. What a challenge we've been given. Well, something happens to motivation when we envision school not as a place to measure the extent of the reward, nor to compete for ascendancy and high scores and measure ourselves in numbers, but to seek the purpose of our innate strengths and our new skills. And at this point, we align our motivation, our passion for learning, with an unseen divine purpose. And at this point, education becomes transformation of society and self. And that becomes worship, whether we know it or not, whether we're even conscious of it. The work that we are doing as we're learning to transform society and self, that's the transformation that is really quite worshipful. And at this point, we begin to learn the purpose of our education, another higher purpose, and that is to actualize our bond as members of one human family. This is why we learn. And we find in learning communities from Afghanistan to Zambia, from the USA to Papua New Guinea to Vanuatu, that this is motivational. This is motivational. I have a story that was later in my presentation, but I'm going to jump in and tell it here. There was a study recently done with pregnant mothers in their last stages of pregnancy. And the researcher took laser dots and placed them on the mother's stomach to see if the fetus would have any difference in their heartbeat based on the patterns of the dots. Well, there was no reaction until those dots were placed there in the shape of a human face. And then the heartbeat sped up. To me, maybe I am reading too much into this, but to me, this means that even before we are born, we are anxious to meet our human family. We're anxious to see another human being. The purpose of our growth, of our development, of those last few minutes of brain development and excitement about birth itself is so we can meet a human being, see another member of our human family. It's quite an interesting piece of research. Now, in the Baha'i faith, we think of this as the age of literacy. One of the core principles is the independent search for truth, the idea that we should evaluate truth with our own eyes, and that we should infuse humanistic purpose into literacy and welcome distinctive education in all of its contexts. This is an age that is new in history. It wasn't possible for people at all times in history not to depend on the clergy or the politicians or someone else to make up their mind about what was important, even the poets and the philosophers. Today, we can do this for ourselves. So we seek coherence. We seek coherence between the material and the spiritual education for humanity because we can. We can build a nest for idealism and innovation because we live in this age of literacy. Every child is potentially the light of the world, and at the same time, it's darkness. Wherefore must the question of education be accounted as of primary importance. This is what Abdu'l-Baha said, the son of Baha'u'llah. And so these children of war, we look at what's happening all over the world today with children. You look in their eyes, the light has not been extinguished. The light is there. Will they be the peacemakers? I've seen children stand up in countries where they are in extreme conditions of violence and trauma and say to their classmates, we must be the first generation of peacemakers. We must do this. We're the only ones that can. We have the tools. We can go to school. This is what we must preserve. I've also met the teacher of a dictator. A teacher who said, you know, I was his teacher decades and decades ago when he was in the 4th grade. And I lament that that was a responsibility I didn't meet to prevent what's going on in our country, because all the teachers in the school gave up on this boy when he was in the 2nd to 4th grade, and he became a bully at that time. What a profound statement for a teacher. So how important is education? Vitally important in the age of literacy. But what kind of education? What do we emphasize in this age? The happiness and greatness, the rank and station, the pleasure and peace of an individual have never consisted in his personal wealth, but rather in his excellent character, his high resolve, the breadth of his learning, and in his ability to solve difficult problems. So is literacy enough? Is awareness enough? No, problem solving. That's what Abdu'l-Baha said we must do in The Secret of Divine Civilization. Learning must lead to problem solving. Now, this talk is going to not focus so much on Baha'i schools in terms of Baha'i administered schools, or even who goes to school. For instance, we know that the Baha'i teachings urge us to prioritize girls' education, because in parts of the world where girls have been discriminated against educationally and are suddenly having that opportunity, we're seeing communities thrive, their health, their economics, in many ways are improving the more that we educate young girls. So that's really another topic, is who we educate. Well, we educate everyone. But now the question of, oh, by the way, these girls have met with the Nobel Peace Prize winner in Liberia to have her help them design projects for peace. These girls in Liberia are at an energy center studying sustainable development. This is what can happen when we educate girls. It's a wonderful thing. But now beyond who can learn, the question, of course, is how and why we learn. Where we learn can be anywhere that you have this common vision. Baha'is on every, sorry, I can't get that to stay. Baha'is on every continent have developed schools. They're just everywhere in the world. When I became a Baha'i, everybody I met said, oh, I just came from Paraguay. Oh, I just came from Central America or South America or Australia or Africa or Papua New Guinea. Everybody was developing schools, and it played a great role in my understanding that Baha'is act. Baha'is don't just have ideals, Baha'is act on their convictions. And to me, that was greatly impressive. And so I see that there are tools we can use to educate everyone in the world, not to distinguish between the religions and the ethnicities of people, but to educate everyone and everyone of every class. At Full Circle Learning, we help build the capacity of teachers. We provide free professional development around the world. And as you can see here, these are children at a school for subsistence farmers in Haiti on the left. And on the right, you'll see a Full Circle Learning inspired new school being built in China. It isn't the shell that's important. It's the common vision. It's really understanding why we learn that becomes the essential question. For example, I'll give you just a few examples. Here's a school in China where the builder himself, it was a private school, and he said, I'm going to make the school the nucleus of the whole community. So he built a school for many, many children, and beside it, he built a nursing home with a memory ward for 1,000 seniors. And then he built a low-income factory. He put them all on one property so that he could have a rooftop environmental garden. The children could go to the garden and study botany, do their projects. They could take their loquats and everything else they were growing, bring them down to the ground floor, walk next door, and serve whatever adopted grandparents they had been assigned. And then because the fathers didn't have to drive so far anymore, they could come over after work, meet the children in those quads at the nursing home and help them cook for the seniors. And suddenly the family bonds just became incredible. The children gave testimonials about what this meant for their relationships, not only with the elders, but with their fathers. And the fathers began to weep, realizing what they had missed in the years before. So there's an example of what a school can do for a whole community. What can a school do for the child? Well, the girl you see here was 13 last year, and she decided she had just had a unit. Every unit has a theme, and it begins with that character theme, and it culminates in service to humanity, to the community, locally and globally. Well, this girl had just learned about acting on your convictions. And so she looked around and said, my community doesn't have enough protein in their diet. We don't have a lot of agriculture. We live in a swamp, basically a delta. So she said, I see a lot of crabs out there. I'm going to design a new crab net and teach my community crabbing. So she improved the diet of her whole community with her engineering skills. Well, 2 months later, because of climate change, the floods were worse than usual. And so the water source of the community was flooded and everybody got dysentery. She said, well, I'm the one here that knows how to act on my convictions. I'm going to go interview every family, see what I can do to take care of their health needs. And then I'm going to design a water filtration system using recycled materials and deliver one to every family so they can have clean water because they can't afford to go to the doctor. Amazing. This girl was inspiring to us all. This was the result of her education. She had about maybe 2 years in a classroom that had been inspired by these ideals, this model. Many examples of how science can be infused with this higher purpose. In Lesotho at the top, the children were challenged to incorporate recyclables into inventions. And one boy came up with a 12-volt lamp based on a plastic water jug, and the community then began selling them, improved their economy. On the right, you have children in Southern California who went to a biochemical company and observed how they make cures for disease and then shipped them around the world, and then gave the scientists awards for altruism. On the bottom, you have a girl who is using a clinometer to do the carbon count of a tree so that they can show the community how to act on their convictions in terms of their environment. This is a wonderful project. In the past year, you can't even imagine how many lives have been touched. Up on the right, you see a girl from Nigeria, where one school decided, a school operated by a Baha'i, decided that they were going to take on as the community need that was the theme of their learning unit. They were going to look at health disparities. So they went to the local hospital and said, what is the major disease that you would like us to look at, and can you teach us about it? Well, it was loss of fever, which most people don't have much knowledge of, neither did the students. So they learned about loss of fever, and they went out into the community and they taught everybody door to door how to prevent loss of fever. And then they decided, well, we'll take some field trips to other schools and we'll help other teachers and other students become health advocates and teach them about loss of fever. And then we'll go do some environmental cleanups and make sure we don't have any rodent infestations. Well, they got asked to go farther and farther, and pretty soon they had reached 20,000 people with their message. And so the government called them in and said, you know, people trust you because you have these spiritual ideals at the heart of what you're learning, and you're doing this without pay. You're going out and doing public health work without pay. And when we go out and do this work, the people think that they don't trust us because they think that we actually want to reduce the population. So we're going to give them some medicine that will poison them. I mean, there was this rumor in the community that don't trust the government. So the government asked them to take on diabetes, high blood pressure, malaria, several other diseases. This is what this team is doing now. They've reached 150,000 people in the last 3 months with this same process of the students becoming the teachers of the community, because their spiritual ideals are aligned with their actions and their education, their science education. And then they started a wisdom exchange with one of the other countries. It happened to be Zambia. Zambia was trying to work on typhoid in several of their village schools. And so they looked at the same process for overcoming the problem. But then they said, okay, we've done that. We've taught our community how to prevent typhoid, but now we're going to go to our government and ask them to study loss of fever, because they had never done it before. So here you have students who are actually influencing the health priorities of their nation. So inspiring to me. And on the bottom, you have a little boy in Cameroon, where the youngest children were doing international campaigns for breast cancer, informing people about how to prevent breast cancer. So all of this is determined by the local community and what the teachers feel is the highest need at that moment. And that's why it's grassroots in nature, and yet it has this common theme. This girl from the Gambia is part of a classroom where they were teaching nutrition to illiterate mothers whose babies were dying of kwashiorkor, the malnutrition. And so they used visual images to make food charts for the children in the school, to teach the mothers who had never been to school, and their babies began to get well. This was a Baha'i school in School of the Nations in Brazil, where they had a teacher who'd been trained in full circle learning, our model. And suddenly these boys in middle school who had been quite a challenge became the high achievers. These are the girls who were in their group doing water conservation projects. The principal came to the boys and said, well, what changed? Why have you changed so much in the last year? And they said, well, we're beginning to see the purpose of our learning. that learning has to have a purpose. Otherwise, we're just here to entertain each other. These children are Mexican Americans. They were 3 and 4 years old. They're learning about the water cycle, and it was a time of extreme drought. So their theme was patience. Their habit of heart was patience. And they were learning about how much patience it took to grow plants. So their community service was to learn songs and use fractions to follow recipes and make pies, pumpkin pies, and then invite in all the farmers and have a ceremony to honor them for showing patience during the drought. The farmers were weeping, of course. It was a very touching thing, but they saw the purpose in their education. Every country has agriculture projects to enhance food security. We've seen these on almost every country we serve, and they're increasing right now because people are worried about the war inducing greater levels of famine around the world. So especially in our African, right now we're very active in about 12 African countries, and they are all doing agriculture. One project, you can see the girls on the bottom here, they are raising chickens and sheep, and then they, with the eggs that they sell and the goat milk and so forth and the sheep's wool, they raise money to help the vulnerable people, the orphans to buy school supplies and the widows to buy food in their community. So there's an altruistic purpose in every agricultural project, even schools for orphans. They're growing food, not just for themselves, but for their community. There's always that element of service to humanity in all the projects. This was a wonderful project, tribal unification in 2 countries, as the Gambia and Zambia. They decided one had 72 tribes, the other had 7 tribes, and they were afraid of political unrest in their upcoming election. And of course, the students had learned conflict resolution and consultation skills. And so they held marches and demonstrations and community talks and cultural festivals, and they reduced the tensions in their country. This is a school activity. You can do this at school. The teachers just have to be so infused with purpose themselves. The motivation begins with the teachers. In this case, the boys were in Tanzania. They wanted girls to be able to go to school, and the girls were off collecting kindling, deforesting the landscape. So they said, we don't want deforestation anymore. We have to stop using kindling for our cooking fuel. So the boys had this process they used. They decided to make dung patties because there was a lot of cattle and a lot of straw. And so they made dung patties. You can see that's why they're wearing masks. This is pre-pandemic. And so everybody learned how to use dung patties to cook with in their outdoor stoves. Well, then through the wisdom exchange, the students in America sent them cardboard models of how to make a solar cooker. They'd never heard of solar cooking. Within 3 months, the whole community was transformed. The girls were back in school, and nobody had to wear a mask to make a dung patty because they were using solar power for all of their cooking. Again, what's the spiritual purpose? What's the spiritual theme of the unit? The outcome was service to humanity, learning about science, learning about literacy, everything that we do. In this case, it was the pandemic. You have students on the bottom from Liberia who had remembered Ebola and what that did to their families. They were the first ones to respond to the outbreak of Ebola, of coronavirus in China. They created a beautiful song and they made a YouTube video of it and they sent it to the children in China. And it was very emotional. Well, the children of China, they had to respond because you're honoring each other's wisdom. You're not patronizing and saying, we know more than you do. Everybody can use their science, their social science, the arts, the music, the conflict resolution exercises to bring to fruition a project that helps the human family in their own neighborhood, in their own community, and has applications internationally. And in this case, the little children said, we're the first ones to pioneer homeschooling. You know, the whole country is on lockdown. The whole country is homeschooling. How do you do that? How do you honor the physicians and the nurses? How do you learn the science of what coronavirus looks like? And you're 4 years old. So they put all that in writing and in pictures, and they sent that to, and how do you train your parents to be your teachers? So they sent that to the students in Liberia, and that was a wisdom exchange. Averting conflict is really important. Our whole program started with the civil unrest of '92 in Los Angeles. Our first project was housed at the Baha'i Center there. And the whole idea is to help children become the change agents and the humanitarians of society, not its victims. So conflict resolution is a very important part of what we teach. And it comes to play in cases like the picture on the bottom here, where the children of Liberia, when they heard that there was an insurrection about to come to pass, they went to where the men were about to start it. And they brought their signs and they made speeches, they brought their microphone, and they said, we can teach you how to negotiate. We can teach you how to consult. We can teach you conflict resolution on our conflict bridge. Please don't do this. Liberia has had 2 generations of children at war who suffered the impacts of war. Don't do this to our generation. Well, guess what? The men stopped and thought and realized, we have children at home. What are we thinking? These kids are right. We'll go to them if we want some advice. So they put their weapons away and went home. 500 people, a crowd of 500 people went home and did not start a civil insurrection. So this is the value of schools that really think about their purpose in transforming society. Now, here are 10 Baha'i concepts that are ingrained into such schools. Number 1, the idea of carrying forward an ever-advancing civilization. Baha'u'llah wrote, all men, not a few, but all men and women too, have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. Those virtues that befit his dignity are compassion and loving kindness toward all the peoples and kindreds of the earth. And isn't it nice that that second sentence is a part of this quote? Because an ever-advancing civilization doesn't mean only technology. It means there must be a parallel path toward love and kindness. When those things are linked in the learning unit, then there's always an understanding that material progress has to go hand in hand with spiritual progress. Spiritual influences, seeing darkness as mere absence of light. There is a quote that says, whatever it holds of darkest tragedy, it leaves mankind at its close, not facing a grim, inhospitable future, but marching out from the shadow on the high road of an inevitable destiny. This is about the early history of the Baha'i religion and the idea that the trials faced early on are all for the sake of future peace, of a peace, a most great peace that would come in the future. Well, think about what happens when we apply that same principle to religion, that we need to have that sense that tests and difficulties are not something that we necessarily need to avoid, but something that we need to embrace. Move ahead in my notes here. And how do we embrace that? Well, we redefine hardship for one thing. Abdu'l-Baha said, give them, the children, the advantage of every useful kind of knowledge. Let them share in every rare and wondrous craft and art. Bring them up to work and strive and accustom them to hardship. It doesn't say accustom them to cell phones. Bring them up to work and strive and accustom them to hardship. Teach them to dedicate their lives to matters of great import and inspire them to undertake studies that will benefit mankind. This picture came in to us just this week from a refugee camp in Uganda, where for less than a year, probably about 9 months ago, the trainer went into this refugee camp where the teachers and teachers of both schools and after-school programs in the surrounding area had asked what they could do to get these children into school, because the children in the refugee camp didn't have access to education. Well, the trainers were trained, and the children then not only went out to the neighboring communities to go to school, singing on the way, helping each other on the way, but they started projects within their refugee camp to raise crops, to grow food, to feed the people in the camp. And here they are learning that art can be a service, that you can teach other people through your artwork. So they're doing art for the same, at the very first time in their lives, as a means of education and also a means of service. These are children in the refugee camp itself, but they're going to schools outside the community now. So this has been a really inspiring project. And why are they excited? Because they know what it's like not to have school. Because they've been without, they know the importance of, once you have education, to share it with others and to teach others what you know, to teach them nutrition, to teach them about health disparities, to teach them what will help them to thrive. O God, protect these children, graciously assist them to be educated, enable them to render service to the world of humanity. O God, these children are pearls, cause them to be nurtured within the shell of thy loving kindness. This is one of my favorite prayers. It has some very important words. It links education with rendering service to humanity. It really is the essence of Baha'i education, that education for its own sake is not complete until you have this opportunity to serve. Another concept, transcendence and manifest purpose. O people, words must be supported by deeds, for deeds are the truest of words. Without the former, the latter can never quench the thirst of the yearning soul, nor unlock the portals of the vision before the eyes of the blind. And nobody says it like Baha'u'llah. What a beautiful, beautiful thought this is about how we link words and deeds. And you know, it's one thing to learn that at home. It's another thing if you also have the advantage of having those concepts linked throughout the school day from the earliest age. Can you imagine? One of the things that has always inspired me is to think about Abdu'l-Baha as kind of a pattern for language in demonstrating the coherence of these two things, deeds and words. We have the words of Baha'u'llah. We have the example of his son, Abdu'l-Baha, who was a role model of what it is to exemplify a transcendent and manifest purpose in word and deed. Everything he did was purposeful. I asked one of our alumni students the other day, a young man who's had some real struggles, but he's now going to Berkeley. And I said to him, what do you think is the purpose of life? And he, in one word, and he said, oh, that's so easy. He said, it's love, it's love. this is what we want students to feel through not only their religious training and their education at home, but their school day. In the 1990s, early in the 1990s, one of the things that influenced the models that I've been able to participate in creating was a research study at Humboldt University. And this study was among 1,000 altruists. These were people in their community who had either founded programs like programs for homelessness or for concentration camp survivors, various programs for various walks of life, but these were all civic leaders. And so the researchers interviewed 1,000 people and asked them, what were your early childhood influences? What were the things that happened to you early in life that allowed you to do what you do today, to take your skills and apply them in service to society? And by and large, these people who were not together, these were private, independent interviews, they all came up with 3 common experiences. Number one, to learn from a positive role model outside their family, even beyond their family. Who was that? Most likely a teacher. Number 2, to take actions among others, other people with different perspectives or cultures or experiences. Introducing diversity. Interesting. Introduce diversity. Even in China, I've noticed, when this concept of introducing diversity was taught to them, they'd have a classroom full of children who all had very similar cultural backgrounds. And so they would do activities where they all had to give a speech as 4-year-olds on their favorite vegetable, and then have a little banquet and appreciate each other's vegetables. It can be diversity of thought even, but to learn how to discuss these differences, these different perspectives. And number 3 is really significant because people don't expect it. The thing that these leaders had in common was, as children, they all experienced hardship and they all turn it into problem-solving opportunities. This is what we do in school. Problem-solving opportunities from hardship. They were not absolved from hardship, but rather they were trained to use it in a way that benefited others. And so this became the crux of the learning units that teachers design now. Very, very important. Because if you don't have hardship yourself, you can bet that somebody in your community does. And so you can struggle and strain and have academic challenges to develop your own strength for the purpose of helping people in your community who have hardships. And why do you want to do that? Well, because Baha'u'llah said, since we have created you all from one same substance, it is incumbent upon you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land, that from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest. Beautiful quote again. Baha'u'llah here is speaking on behalf of the divine. This is one of the earliest writings of his where in the hidden words, he's revealing inspirations as if they're coming directly from the Creator, challenging us to be even as one soul, so that there's no distinction between the children who are alter able to have different capacities, the children who are of one ethnicity or another, that there's a sense of oneness. And so when you're serving them, you're serving yourselves. We've had children who, if they're in a community where no one is different from anyone else, they'll sometimes serve the mothers of the premature newborns. There's always somebody you can serve who has a hardship greater than yours. Baha'u'llah also said, strain every nerve to acquire both inner and outer perfections. For the fruit of the inner tree hath ever been and will ever be perfections, both within and without. And that's why we have in our learning units, there are a list of about 60 habits of heart that can be the theme of that unit. And that theme is integrated into everything: science, art, performing arts. It's saturated in a very nuanced way into everything you do. And until you can sit and have a conversation at the end of the unit explaining how your inner striving has helped the outer community, the broader community, then your unit is not yet complete. And with maybe 3 to 5 of these units within a year, you have fulfilled an identity that's different every year. Instead of going from 1st to 2nd to 5th to 8th grade, you might go from helper to peacemaker to ambassador to change agent. You actually have a heroic spiritual identity associated with that. And on the very first day of school, you introduce yourself to your classmates as members of one human family by name, so that from the very first day, you know that everything you're doing is in service to one another, in responsibility to one another. And as you widen that community, the world will become your community through your group actions, your wisdom exchange beyond your own country, that everything really continues to reinforce these spiritual ideals. And the arts and crafts and sciences uplift the world of being and are conducive to exaltation. Knowledge is as wings to man's life and a ladder for his ascent. Its acquisition is incumbent upon everyone. The knowledge of such sciences, however, should be acquired as can profit the peoples of the earth, and not those which begin with words and end with words alone. So we teach children the purpose of your gift as an artist, as a singer, as a dancer, is to uplift, to inspire, to teach, to advocate. If you've been thinking of it to compete, to get rich, to become a YouTube influencer, put that away and think about these 4. Think about these 4. If you do these 4 and those 3 come, okay. Try not to become egotistical, but this is the purpose for our art. It's the same purpose we have for our science. It's everything that we do, is really as a ladder for humanity's ascent. And when you do that, it just changes everything. Suddenly the one who can't sing is singing. Suddenly the guy who did not want to dance, you give him a paint bucket and turn it over and let him drum. And he's just happy to be there singing at the nursing home or out on the streets, drumming for tribal unification or whatever it is in your community. This is a wonderful opportunity when they can use their art. Let us have love and more love. A love that melts all opposition, a love that conquers all foes, a love that sweeps away barriers, a love that aboundeth in charity, a large-heartedness, tolerance, forgiveness, and noble striving, a love that triumphs over all obstacles. In this picture, you see girls in Chad who have just started their first Girls United Club at the school, the Brilliant Star School, and their teachers are holding hands with them. They're so excited to pursue new projects of love. Some of the things they've already done are they grew a community garden, not just to raise food, but to sell the food for chalk for the teachers in some of their nearby schools, because the teachers didn't have enough chalk to keep the school open. This is the level of love and sacrifice that when we see this around the world, it touches our hearts. And we know we can do it in every community, wealthy, not wealthy, everywhere in between. There's an unlimited ways to serve and love your community and everybody in your classroom and your learning environment. Love for everyone, love all the world, love humanity and try to serve it, and work for universal peace and universal brotherhood. That is the vision for Baha'i schools, and we hope for schools everywhere for children from every background, every culture, every faith, every family. And that means our family, because we are their parents and grandparents. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that and giving us your time today.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put it in the chat now. The first question is, so all those stories you were sharing of the children and the schools, are those Baha'i children and Baha'i schools?
Let me put it this way. Most of the founders, a lot of the founders of the schools that you saw are Baha'is. In almost every Baha'i school, you're not serving your own community. You're not segregating. You're serving all of humanity. So I know of very few schools in the developing world that are limited to Baha'i children. So the children you're seeing come from every walk of life, even if the Baha'i founder or the Baha'i teacher is inspired by their Baha'i ideals. And to me, this was a very important principle. When we first started our model, we didn't know it would become what it would, but the whole idea at the Baha'i Center was when a riot broke out and children became victims of just witnessing burning buildings and a lot of violent acts in their neighborhood, we didn't want them to feel that this is the norm. We wanted them to trust people from all walks of life. We didn't go to those who were already receiving support at home. We went to the local school and said, do you have children who need to be a part of this program? And over the years, for 10 years, this became a thriving community of children who actually taught their parents, taught their community new ideals. It wouldn't have done any good to say, we're only going to teach those who already know. So it's really important to serve the whole community, even though the ideals that inspire it come from a Baha'i perspective. Now, those examples that don't fit, that scenario would be if somebody is only strictly teaching the Baha'i faith. And there are a handful of schools like that in the world. But most schools that I know of are there to serve the community, are there to serve everyone. And so some of them integrate greater and lesser levels of Baha'i content. But in our cases, the children who are Muslim, the children who are Christian or have a Buddhist heritage or whatever it is, they come away feeling like their religion has been reinforced too. Because indeed it has, because these are universal principles that everyone believes in at their heart, at the core of their parents' tradition as well. They just get to see it come to fruition through this updated version of progressive revelation that takes it one step farther. Love your neighbor really means love every single other child on the planet now. Didn't mean that when Jesus could only go as far as his donkey would carry him, then people perceive that message a little bit differently. But now in the age of technology, we can love everyone, and the children are getting that information by osmosis. A long answer to a short question, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. The next question is, can you expand on the 9th point? I don't remember what that was, but.
Let me see what that point was. Oh, I think I skipped it. At the outset of every endeavor, it is incumbent to look to the end of it all. Of all the arts and sciences, set the children to studying those which will result in advantage to man, will ensure his progress and elevate his rank. Thus, the noisome odors of lawlessness will be dispelled, and thus, through high endeavors of the nation's leaders, all will live cradled and secure in peace. So by the end of the learning unit, students should be able to evaluate their work in terms of how it affected the broader community. And this evaluation itself teaches us a spiritual practice. It teaches us context and the importance of attaching our learning to a spiritual purpose. Now, I don't know if that is the number 9 that was being asked about, because it seems like I misnumbered my slides, but it was in my notes.
Thank you. Does Full Circle also have schools and projects in the US?
Yes, and that's a really interesting question. Full Circle Learning is headquartered in the US and began in the US. After this, it's our 30th anniversary this year. So we began a pilot project in 1992 during the aftermath of the civil unrest in Los Angeles. And what we found over time was that was a complementary program. It was after school and summer school. And over time, the parents asked us to start a charter school. So we started a charter school. And then other people asked us to start summer schools and after school programs. Up here, we have a climate change camp. In Central California, we have the summer school for migrant workers, children, that type of thing. But every time someone has tried to expand it into a public school or another setting, there are more layers of bureaucracy here than there are in other places. We go where anyone asks us by word of mouth. We now have a online training program, so we can even go to places where you might be forbidden to do something in an overt way, like Iran, Afghanistan, places where it's more difficult to do on-site programs. But we go where it's asked for. If someone asks for it in the US, it's very, very easy for us to help you implement it.
Thank you. I guess I have a question. I've heard a lot of, well, some people say that, children are too young to really develop their critical thinking.
Oh my gosh.
And that therefore, religion or spiritual concepts shouldn't be taught to children because they're too young to make that decision for themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you've been talking to people who don't know children and who haven't raised children. I mean, any of us who are grandparents and godparents and have seen many, many children grow up have seen the difference between those who had an early education, early. The brain is almost completely done. Really, it's finished growing physiologically by the time you're about 5. And then you're still trying to get better judgment until you're about 22. But boy, if you miss those early years, you've missed an opportunity. Now, do you have critical thinking skills? Obviously, those are going to grow over time, but the concepts have to be introduced early and often. Those kids you saw who were doing the water cycle project, when they came home from school and talked about their farmers project, their older siblings who were, 6th grade or so, they were saying, "What? I've been studying that out of a book and I can't understand the water cycle." Well, why couldn't they understand it? Because they didn't have it hands-on, attached to a purpose, attached to the arts, attached to service. The early learning was what gave them the advantage. How you teach it, we have to be aware of developmental differences, and that's why you have different people with a certificate to teach preschool versus primary school versus single subjects at the upper grades. But no, you've missed an opportunity if you miss early life. I'll tell just one quick story in relation to that. This was in the program for the kids who were children of farm workers. And it was an evening when they were being taught to honor their mothers And so for Mother's Day, they were each going to decorate and paint a birdhouse. And the teacher had all the birdhouses lined up. They were wooden, they were really nice. And one boy walked in and he brought two friends. They were all late. The boy who was the leader had been with that program for about 6 years. I mean, some of the kids now are adult site supervisors and teachers. It's been going on a generation, so you can see who has really reaped the benefits of the program. This boy had been in the program for about 6 years, and he was in, I want to say, 6th grade, 7th grade. The second boy had only been in the program for about 3 months. The third boy was brand new. And the teacher said, "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I don't have enough birdhouses. I only have 2 left. The habit of heart is sacrifice this month. Somebody is going to have the opportunity to sacrifice." The first boy bowed to the teacher and said, "Oh, thank you for this opportunity. Just give me a piece of paper and a pencil and I'll write my mother a poem." The second boy said, "Oh, this is so hard. Oh, I don't know if I can do it or not. Just let me think about it for a minute." The third boy grabbed a birdhouse, stole it, and ran away with it. So you can see the difference between early learning and how it affects life choices, how it affects your comprehension about the value of your deeds and your concepts that might be artistic or scientific or whatever they are. The critical thinking is about life choices, and it's also about whatever academic subject you learn. In a community, you may have different national standards if you're in America or China or Canada or Zambia or wherever. Those standards academically are infused into the learning unit. So you're not going to be asked to do more than you're capable of developmentally. You're just going to do it more effectively if you've had all of this integrated together at an early age. You're going to have higher motivation. Again, sorry for the long answer to a short question, but it was really, I'm glad you asked it because it's such an important thing for people to realize. When we were asked to start the charter school, it was because kids were going to middle school and getting beat up on the first day. And so they wanted a middle school. And then one of the other board members in that neighborhood said, "No, that's not going to work. They have to start from infancy to be prepared to go to a middle school and not beat each other up. So we have to have a K-8 school." And so it was a K-8, kindergarten through 8th grade school.
Thank you. Is the online program that you mentioned, is it open to everyone?
It's open to everyone. You contact me because this is something brand new that we're doing. We like to do things on site, but this is an opportunity now with technology to do it online. And when we go into the developing world, our services are always free. And we'll give you the code to take a free course, this course for free. If you choose to make a donation to take it, then we'll tell you how to do that. And then your donation will help someone in the developing world to be able to take it for free. So it's either, it can be free or not free, but that'll be your choice. So please contact me. You can, if you want, give people the website or give them my personal email address. Anybody who's interested. I'd really love to see America have the advantages that the developing world has been asking for so many years, because I think where there's a great need, the teachers see that need. And our facilitators, we have about 20 people working in Africa. They'll go to a school and 10 more schools will show up and say, "Well, train us too." So we train in multiple numbers of schools at the same time. In Liberia, there have been as many as 400 schools that were trained. So I'd like to see people understand that for me, and I hope this doesn't sound prejudicial, but one of the greatest hardships in life as a child is to have too much, to be entitled to so many advantages in life that you don't have the chance to learn the lessons that these children are learning. And so if people can integrate the concepts into programs where they're not living with extreme poverty, and they're not living with war, and they're not living with, extreme health challenges and malaria and everything else on top of COVID, then imagine how far these children could go. So right now, especially with people talking about homeschool networks and distance learning because they're tired of the pandemic, now would be a good time for parents to get together and start a program and get somebody trained and do it in their own community.
Great, thank you. And we'll put your website in the description box of the YouTube video when we upload this. So
okay, and it's fine to give out my personal email, so I'll actually see the request if it comes.
Okay, sounds good. The next question is, would you encourage to open schools where the Baha'i teachings are followed, such as the Nancy Campbell Academy in Ontario, Canada?
Well, I don't want to speak about individual schools. A lot of people have gone through those schools and become wonderful adults. And I think the challenge with any school, when there's a challenge, it's almost always an administrative challenge. It has to do with finance. It has to do with, keeping the doors open. It has to do with serving everyone, having equity, and still being able to afford the real estate, the regulations of that country, pay the staff. So those are individual questions that I think make it harder and harder to open those types of schools. So I would say, in America, we have charter schools. So I think since we have had charter schools, there have been fewer people trying to open private schools. But in some areas, it's very difficult to sustain a charter school because the restrictions are so very difficult. And that depends on your own locality and the politics happening there. So whatever you want to try to do, I can give you some research options, whoever it is that's asking. But I think that the hardest thing to do probably is to do something that requires a lot of money, like an on-site boarding school. Tends to be quite difficult. But yes, if somebody can afford it, and somebody has researched the government regulations in their country, then sure, why not try it?
Thank you. And another question is, have you heard of the Rezvan School being built in El Salvador, and what do you think of the project?
Well, I've been asked to be the curriculum director, so I've heard of it. I'm just waiting for them to, send me more information. We're going to send somebody there in probably August to train the teachers. I mean, I've seen the design. It looks like a wonderful thing, wonderful facility. So, and an area, again, when you go into these areas that have suffered conflict for so long, it's hard not to turn your attention there and forget the areas where we're fine. We have 3 meals a day, well, 2.5 meals, whatever, So yeah, I think that's going to be a wonderful project, and I'm pleased to be asked to be involved in that.
It's amazing. Thank you. So when it comes to teaching methodology, what's the difference between acting based on guidance or scientifically proven effectiveness and experimenting? And do you have examples of the two?
Examples of experimenting versus scientific. Could you read the question once more so I can get those differences?
The difference between acting based on guidance or scientifically proven effectiveness versus experimenting without a scientifically proven basis.
Well, I think what the questioner is probably referring to is maybe qualitative versus quantitative studies and research, because really most schools that are successful are a combination of both. In order to get grants, you really have to do some research and some studies, but to do scientific studies, you either you have to have access to data from your own schools or to similar schools, and you're combining research from a lot of different models. What we've done is a combination of both. We look at research like the Humboldt study, other things that are very, very data driven. And then we have our own experiential studies and surveys. Surveys are quite valuable. Surveys of teachers who've been trained, surveys among parents about the differences in their students, about the differences in their achievement, as well as their motivation, as well as their spiritual qualities and social skills. And that becomes data over time. The results of those, we have what we call a 19 indicator survey that parents fill out. And over time, we've been able to show that all of the parents feel that there's been a great improvement in motivation to learn. And more than half the parents feel that there's been an improvement in all 19 indicators of spiritual, social, and academic areas. Those sometimes are all you can do. That would really qualify as social action research, as opposed to scientific research where you can measure, you can take a blood sample or something. You know, if we were doing neurological studies and looking at brain chemistry, we would probably be able to see some differences, you know, in the child who has been trained and hasn't been trained. We base part of our data also on studies of infant altruism, and some of those are scientific. The very first study we learned of was a longitudinal study about some kids who, as toddlers, were given a stuffed animal, and then for some reason, the researchers had one too, and they would drop it. And they would see whether the children would return it to the researcher or pick it up and keep it and play with it. And the ones that were naturally, innately compassionate, empathetic, altruistic, whatever words you want to use, would give those toys back to the researchers. Well, they studied those little children. We're talking, 1.5 years old, 2 at the oldest. They studied them until they were adults. And they tracked them and found out what kind of homes they're in, what kinds of schools they're in, how many graduated from college. That's statistical data. That's scientific data. And then they found out what careers they chose. And those who were the most altruistic and then continued to be nurtured in effective schools and homes where they were not foster homes, they were not moving around, but they had a 2-parent home of parents who were, encouraging these same ideals. Those kids were off the charts, and they became the doctors, the teachers, the civil servants. Those were the kids who influenced society. So it was both nature and nurture. And I would consider that, about as scientific as you can get if you're looking at how to measure the effectiveness of what you're doing now, is to study what's been done in the past, study the effectiveness, but also document your own anecdotal studies. And you'll see over time the differences, and also use surveys, use any tool that you can. Because if you only rely on science, we tend to look at numbers too much. That's how we ended up with the bubble test, trying to determine what was effective education in America. And those people who had to endure that had quite a struggle when they went into the job market and learned that they needed critical thinking skills and they needed social skills. So, it depends on how you define science, and whether it means only looking at the neurology and the developmental ages, or whether it means also tracking the results through surveys and studies, internal studies. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, no, that was really comprehensive. Yes, definitely. Thank you. I think we'll close it off there. So thank you so much again to Dr. Langness. That was really interesting. We really appreciate all your insight.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Of course. So next week's speaker will be Mr. John Weegley, and his topic will be mysticism for the modern age. So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I've put the link to our contact form in the chat if you're not on our mailing list already. And then we'll go ahead and end with a Baha'i song.
I have a dream of what I wanna be. I wanna be free. That's what my heart keeps telling me. Give me your hand.
We'll find a way.
There's people out there
They feel the same.
if we help each other. I just know we can succeed. We are one, but we are different. We from all around the world. We share the same sun, we share the same oceans. We are every boy and girl. Come together and share our dreams. We'll be amongst the stars, and we know that it's destiny. And we are unity. We are unity.
I do believe, oh, I believe in destiny. It's up to me to make it into reality.
Give me your hand.
We'll find a way
People out there,
that feel the same.
if we help each
other, I just know we can succeed.
we are one, but we are different. We from all around the world. We share the same sun, we share the same oceans. We are every boy and girl. Come together and share our dreams. We'll be amongst the stars, and we know that it's destiny. That we are unity. No matter where you're from or who you are, if we can find common place to be, then we are friends. We are one, but we are different. We from all around the world. We share the same sun, we share the same ocean.